It is by Philip Pullman, called Demon Voices on Stories and Storytelling. Philip Pullman is the author of the trilogy His Dark Materials, which I forgot to look up. The names of those three books are, shouldn't they be listed here? Oh, well. Anyway, it's the so-called fantasy, although he objects to that term, trilogy that follows the development and wisdom enhancement as she grows of Lyra, a young girl who is in a world with demons, where you have basically a familiar as a child that changes form as you're a child, and then at some point cements in place as a particular form, and so that explains the title of this book. So anyway, this is a book about writing, about story, and it's a series of essays that Pullman has given places, and quite compelling in many regards. And I wanted to share a section from an essay that he gave as a talk called "The Path Through the Wood," and this was a talk that he gave in. I'm sure I can find it. I'm not as prepared as I might be. In 1999 at the FinCon Science Fiction Convention at the University of Turku in August 1999. So he says, some of you might know that Robert Frost poem, The Road Not Taken, which I think was used as the title of a book not long ago. Frost talks about coming to a fork in the road through a wood, having to choose which way to go. And the poem ends, 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. This, incidentally, was also kind of the adopted tagline of the school where we met. And it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's the adopted tagline and the reason that the school is named as it is.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
So, again, 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So, this is Pullman again. Here we have 2 ideas, the wood and the path. The wood, or the forest if you like, is a wild space. It's an unstructured space. It's a space full of possibilities. It's a space where anything can happen. There are monsters in the wood. There are life forms unlike any others. There are quarks and neutrinos and virtual particles. It's full of charm and strangeness. It's non-linear. It just grew. The path, on the other hand, is a structure, and it has a function. It leads from here to there, or from A to B. It's extremely linear. Even when it doubles back and crosses itself, it does so with an air of purpose. It says, I know where I'm going, even if you don't. It was made. I expect you can see where this is going. Each novel or story is a path because it's linear, because it begins on page 1 and goes on steadily through all the pages in the usual order until it gets to the end, that goes through a wood. The wood is the world in which the characters live and have their being. It's the realm of all the things that could possibly happen to them. It's the notional space where their histories exist and where their future lives are going to continue after the story reaches the last page. Parenthetical, this is the point, from Pullman, this is the point where practitioners of literary theory will throw up their hands in disgust. Characters don't have histories, they would say. The only life they have is that in the words on the page. They are not real people, they are only literary constructions. To mistake the characters in a novel for characters in real life is to make a fundamental category error. It's naive to the point of stupidity, etc., etc. To these ladies and gentlemen of theory, I say, thank you very much. Now go away until you can tell me something useful. End of parenthetical from Pullman. So the wood or the forest is the sum of all possibilities. And he goes on and on and on. But I'll stop there with the reading for now. Excuse me. And so he talks, for instance, about Cinderella. And the story of Cinderella apparently exists in many traditions throughout the world, which tells us, if those are truly independent origins of that story, that there is something universal there. That there is something that truly speaks to humanity, and is not particular to a particular time or place.
I think that's true even if it isn't independent origins.
If it persists.
If it spreads to multiple cultures, that means it's resonating.
It's resonating. It may not have been critical enough to have originated there, but yeah, no. Convergence versus, is the origin due to the common ancestor or to convergence? Either way, if it's persistent,
Yep.
It tells us something about the importance to humans, to humanity. But there are things in the story of Cinderella, with which we are all familiar, that aren't in the story, in the path, as it were, but are clearly in the wood, that are clearly in the universe that is Cinderella. Which is to say, for instance, you know something about how the house is heated in which she is put to work effectively as a scullery maid, because she ends up with coal dust all over herself. And therefore, you know that they don't have central air. Not that they would, coming from when the story originally does. But to this point, Pullman says, he wrote a story from the Cinderella wood, from the world that is brought to us through the path that is the story that is Cinderella, but about one of the other characters in it, about one of the rats that was turned into I don't remember what, one of the people opening the carriage that was a pumpkin in an earlier life for Cinderella. And of course, there is a famous version of this in the form of Hamlet, and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. So Hamlet's two just fairly insignificant characters, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, whom Tom Stoppard, brilliant playwright, pulls up out of obscurity and turns into the lead characters in his play, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. So he's borrowing from the Hamlet wood, as it were, the world, but the wood, and creating a different path through it.
Well, I think the Stoppard example is interesting because in some ways Stoppard he's sort of going beyond what Pullman is saying. Because yes, every properly constructed world in which a story takes place, all of the other features ought to be explorable. Nothing ought to not add up.
Right.
But what Stoppard is in some ways saying with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead is that I, Stoppard, can even do this with two characters who are, it's a rare case in Shakespeare's situation where they're pure plot device.
Yeah.
They're not real characters.
They weren't, yeah.
They were necessary to the story, and
Right.
so they were just kind of invented up for that purpose. And Stoppard takes them and he's like, well, what if they did have depth and a story? And, it's obviously a marvelous piece of work. But anyway, it's the fact that inevitably a story, no matter how short, suggests a world or a set of worlds in which it would be necessary for those worlds to exist in order for the story to happen, and that there's no reason not to explore other trajectories through those habitats is a great idea.
Exactly. And this is, and here we get into questions of cognitive dissonance versus reading something where your brain is constantly throwing errors, where the story is inconsistent with its, the path that you're reading is inconsistent with the wood in which it exists. And you've been told enough about the wood that the path keeps breaking its own rules. Right. Whereas being asked to believe, for instance, in a world in which there are humans like Lyra who have demons, who have associates, who have affiliate animals who are born with them and change shape until they become adults and then are fixed in terms of their organismal form, and they die with them. It doesn't take that much to leap to that. We are never under any impression that that is actually what is true. And this, of course, is one of the problems with modern understanding of, for instance, gender ideology, right? That you can read something in what is patently an untrue situation and get something out of it, get something metaphorical out of it. But it is a mistake to leap to, therefore that thing is literally true. Therefore I, a human woman, can change into being a human man. Therefore I, who adore my cat so much, have him as my demon and, could not live if he went outside of a sphere of some number of feet. Both of those things are not true, but they come from worlds that are compelling and metaphorically instructive, but literally not true.
So there's, as you know, something very deep in your point about the connection between something like the new gender ideology / nonsense and violation of proper, if unstated, rules of narrative.
Right.
And I would just put it this way. You and I have each made the point that there is nothing wrong, even for those of us who are scientific materialists, there's nothing wrong with a story that uses magical realism, as long as it is self-consistent, as long as it is not asking you to continue to adjust your level of what you will believe. Right? You asked once. This is a world in which there are spells. It is not that you just say the words and they happen, but you have to learn to cast them, for example.
This is a world in which, to get between worlds, you have a knife and you can cut holes into different worlds. And wow, can that happen? No, that cannot happen. But in this world, it can. You need the subtle knife.
Or, this is this spacecraft has a single violation of physics in the sense that the outside does not constrain the inside, right? Bigger on the inside.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with these things. And even for us scientific materialists, they're fine. The problem is when you keep throwing new levels of even wilder exceptions, then the point is, well, no, you already told me how magical this realm is. And now you're just being sloppy. You're not even sticking to the rule that you told me you wanted me to accept. So anyway, that's sloppy and not very interesting, and it's not the stuff of great writing. But the problem is when this happens, when an author has told you how magical the realm is, and then they up the ante by 50%, and it's like, that's annoying. They are violating the rule of the universe they sold you.
Yes.
When gender activists try to sell us on the idea that a man who says he's a woman simply is a woman, and we say, okay, from the point of view of how this person should be treated, yes, up until the point where that becomes a problem for the universe I know I live in, and their point is, nope, that universe just changed. This is a transubstantiation that actually changes what a person was, such that Chelsea Manning is the person who gave the documents to Julian Assange. It wasn't Bradley Manning, it was Chelsea Manning, because she was Chelsea Manning the whole time, and the fiction was Bradley Manning. No, you just told me I live in a universe I don't live in, and you're insisting that I accept it. And that same annoyance of, we can talk about how to treat each other. Sure. We can do that as adults who recognize that there are tensions between competing claims on rights. We cannot pretend that there is a truth so sacred, it was born 5 minutes ago, and it's so sacred that anything about the actual universe that it violates now has to change. That is upside down, backwards, and offensive, and it is the reason that we are now in the pickle where people like you and me, who are interested in a world where everybody is as free as possible to be whoever they are best at being, bridle at the very suggestion of these things because of the retconning of the universe that we know we actually live in, the universe that you and I professionally studied and understand something about. We're being told we have to change what we know about the universe in order to be kind to people, and the people who are telling us that aren't being kind in the slightest.
Well, I think it plays on some sort of nascent, latent, in some cases explicit, good-hearted, frankly, libertarian instincts that most people have in a sort of a mid-20th century and later world in which many of the wins of liberals have been instantiated in both in law and in culture, where you can know for sure that as another human being, you share a certain number of experiences and ways of understanding the world, but you cannot ever fully understand what it is to be in someone else's head. But this is a large part of what we do as humans. We engage in theory of mind, and those of us who don't try to are dangerous. Frankly, are dangerous and at best deeply unpleasant to be around. Anyone who is not actually trying to figure out what the experience of other human beings is unpleasant at best and dangerous often to be around. But one of the things that I think the vast majority of us came to understand, for us, this was all happening sort of before we were born and as we were growing up, but is if someone says to you, actually, that's not my experience, I had this experience, it is often valuable and interesting and respectful to say, oh, tell me about your experience then, right? That doesn't mean that I don't get to have an opinion about what it might be like to be someone I'm not, but it does mean that I know that I have not had the experience. So that is true. You will never be a woman. You will never be a black man. You will never be, I don't even know what the correct word is to use now, a small person. A dwarf, I guess,
Yes.
is one version of that, right? And yet, you have engaged with, both in reality and through narrative, stories, as you know, as have I, that include such people, and read history, and we can try as much as possible to put ourselves in the position of others. So then we have the weaponization of this lived experience thing into not only can't you know, but you're not allowed to voice an opinion. You're not allowed to, if you're an actor or actress, play that kind of person. You're not allowed to borrow from the experience of, which is, of course, it's an anti-human statement, the idea that you're not allowed to borrow, right? You're not allowed to steal. But the idea that borrowing is inherently theft is juvenile and itself dangerous, right? So we end up with this gender ideology, which frankly, some amount of it tricked me. And I remember, I did not expect that we were going here today, but I remember at some point when I was teaching animal behavior back in like the mid-aughts, like gonna have been 2008 or 2009, and I said something about sex, and some students said, "Don't you mean gender?" I said, "It's the same thing, doesn't matter." And I have kind of, we've said a number of things about gender is sex role, and gender is the software of sex, and gender is the behavioral manifestation of sex, and all of this, and gender is more fluid than sex, and sex is binary, and gender is bimodal, and I still think that that's useful, because we do have different, there are other organisms that are hermaphroditic, either sequentially or simultaneously, and that do have, once they change sex, a change in their sex roles as well. But that's not us. And that will never be us. That's not what humans are. And so there's this simultaneous like borrowing off of the good and sort of libertarianish instincts of people to say, oh, is that your experience? Tell me about it. Or I'm not going to question it. If that's your experience, you do you. And then there's the, oh gosh, I didn't mean to offend. Okay, I won't say anything about your experience. And then we jump into this, actually, them to us, what you think is true about reality is just a sign of your fill in the ism here. It's the patriarchy, it's the misogyny, it's the turfism, it's like whatever it is. And so we pretty quickly decay into name calling, which is really the only recourse of those who would deny reality. And yet somehow in many circles they're winning. And so let us remember the wood and the path of any particular story. And when we read fantasy, for instance, that does play around with sex and gender, like for instance Octavia Butler does. She's fantastic. Her worlds are fantastic. And she has, I don't remember which book it is, but she has one in which there's a third sex. That is necessary. And, they're humanoid. They're like human. It's as if they're human, but there's a third sex that is necessary. I think, if I remember correctly, they're humanoid. And you read it and you learn something about how the two sexes in humans could be interacting that maybe we aren't doing. But you never forget that this is a wood, that this is a world that is not ours. It's a different world. It's a fictional